Welcome to Meet at the Table, where warriors are forged. I'm your host, Don Jurl. Let's get started. Well, good evening. Hope you've had a good Thursday. As you can see here, as far as the title tonight, it's Who Governs You? And I know that I started this week with We Are to Live as Free Men, and that's true, and I'm not contradicting that. But the only way to live as free men, to truly live as free men, is that we have submitted to the Lordship of Jesus Christ. But even with that, all right, we are still being governed. We have president, we have Congress, we have governors, we have mayors, we have, all these representatives. And so there is still, there's still government, all right? There's still government. But I'm not talking about any of that here tonight. What I'm talking about here tonight, and I want to just give a verse of scripture. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, it says, "For am I now seeking the approval of man or of God? Or am I trying to please man? If I were trying to please man, I would not be the servant of Christ." And so when I ask the question, and it's in the title, Who Governs You? What I'm saying is this, and that is, whose approval are we seeking? You see, if I'm seeking the approval of man, then I'm being governed by man. And not only am I being governed by man, I'm not being the servant of Christ. And so, again, it brings us back to the question, and that is, whose approval are we seeking? And the reason I ask that is because, for the most part, what do we see today? We see everybody's tiptoeing around everybody's feelings, worried about, what they're going to think, what they're going to say, whatever the case might be. And man, it goes back, and I hate to keep saying this, but you got to lay the blame where the blame needs to be laid. The modern day church has produced really cowards that are seeking the approval of man. All right. You can look in churches, you can have, and I'm a pastor. All right. So I pastor a church. It could be really easy, to know of a sin or something that's in the lives of the people that is there, or maybe the lives of a certain group of people that is there. And you go, I don't think I'm going to do that. I don't think I'm going to address that. I don't think I'm going to say anything about that because, they do so much around here, and, maybe they're, contribute really big financially and stuff. But if I was doing that, then I would not be the servant of Christ. What I would be doing is I would be seeking their approval. And at what cost? Okay? You cannot let these things go unchecked. And so, pastors have got to have the boldness that, if there's sin there, you got to call it out. You can't worry about a paycheck, can't worry about, church membership, can't worry about any of them things. You got to call it out, because ultimately, we're to be the servant of Christ. Ultimately, it's not about man's approval. It's not about what man thinks. It's about what God thinks. But again today, all right, it seems like everybody is tiptoeing around everybody's feelings. And I've said this before, and I'm not going to go into it much here tonight, but I will mention it again, and that is the feminization of the church. We have so many churches today. You might have a man in the pulpit, but you got a woman running the church. Because the man in the pulpit has got to tiptoe around her feelings. You got to tiptoe, around her. And everybody said, well, you can't make her mad, or you can't make these ladies mad. You can't do this. Well, now we've got even bigger problems, because now that church is not being conducted in the order in which God said it was to be conducted. And that is, the man is to be the head of his house. The man has the headship, and so therefore, even in the church, the man should, it should be the man as a deacon, should be man as a pastor. And so if you throw that out, and all of a sudden, okay, you got to tiptoe around these feelings. Men and women are different. Men think rationally, women think emotionally, and then you're getting in even a bigger mess, all right? Because now, these ladies are running the church, and they're thinking emotionally. And so they're like, oh, we got to worry about their feelings. We got to worry about his feelings. We got to worry about her feelings. And then you have the feminization of the church, and you just have weak men. All right. And so we don't want that. If Paul said, If I am seeking the approval of man, then I'm no longer the servant of Christ. And so it don't matter, what anybody thinks. When it comes right down to it, it's what does God think? What does God think? And so I just want to give you this story here tonight. It's straight out of Scripture, just something to think about, and I'll end with this, okay? In 1 Corinthians chapter 13, verse 1, it says, David consulted with the captains of thousands and hundreds and with every leader. And David said unto all the congregation of Israel, if it seem good unto you, now keep that in mind, and did it be of the Lord our God, let us send abroad unto our brethren everywhere that are left in the land of Israel, and with them also to the priests and the Levites which are in their cities and suburbs, that they may gather themselves unto us, and let us bring again the ark of our God to us, for we inquired not at it in the days of Saul. And all the congregation said that they would do so, for the thing was right in the eyes of all the people. So David gathered all Israel together, from Shinar of Egypt even unto the entering in of Hamath, to bring the ark of God from Kirjath Jearim. And that's the best I can do with that. All right. The point is this, okay? Not my bad interpretation of the words. But the point of it is this. They didn't seek God. They didn't seek God. They're talking about this amongst each other, and they're like, how does it feel? What do you think about this? Does it feel all right to you? No, we can't do that. Ultimately, it does not matter. And we know, and that what they did was wrong. They did not do it God's way. And there was a death because of that. Ultimately, it's not what does my brother think? It's what does God think? What does God have to say about this? How is God leading? How is God directed? And so if we're going to seek the approval of God, and we should, okay? We should. We'll quit tiptoeing around feelings. And I'll tell you something else. If we're seeking the approval of God, there is no way that we can continue to be silent while our nation goes to hell in a handbasket. And so let's quit worrying about man's feelings. Let's quit, is man all right with this? Who cares? Let's go, what does God want? And is God all right with this? And is God approved with this? Does God approve of this? And so I'm going to leave you with that here tonight. Thank you for tuning in. I'm your host, Don Jurl, signing off.